Thank you, Sharon. So yeah, we're starting off with a DPC session today. We're the hosts of the conference, so I think it's my duty to say Cwd Mil Fadja, which is 100,000 welcomes to Glasgow, and thank you for coming and joining us at this session today. We're hoping to keep it relatively relaxed because it's a tutorial rather than kind of too stringent. We will have plenty of chance for questions today, and we will be doing a little bit of practical exercises as well. And really what we're here today is to introduce the topic of continual improvement. Sorry, I need to get through all the slides. Who knew there were so many? Okay. I don't know what's happened to our slides. This is going well so far. No. Well, good to get all of the technical difficulties out of the first go. Do we need to bring up here?
Sharon definitely made it work.
Is it in a...
These ones?
No, not the main tweeter. There's a whole slide deck. Well, while that's happening, so our idea today is that I'm going to give you an introduction to continual improvement and why we recommend it as an approach to digital preservation. Then Jen's going to come up after that and talk about RAM, our rapid assessment model for assessing your organisational capacity for digital preservation. Then after the break, Amy's going to talk about our brand new competency framework and the audit toolkit that goes along with it. Thank you, guys. And we're going to have a bit of exercise with both of those, and also during Jen's session we're going to have a little bit of fun with the Mentimeter where you can vote on some stuff around your RAM capabilities. For the exercises, it is best if you can do them on a laptop or tablet or something that you have with you, and you can download all of the resources from the DPC website, which is at dpconline.org. But we do have a limited number of printed copies in case anybody doesn't have a laptop or something with them. And the session today is being webcast, so a big hello to anybody watching us online, and we hope that you'll contribute some questions to what we go on here. And finally, in terms of our welcome, we do have a selection of badges relating to CAT and RAM if you would like to help yourself at any point during today. This seems to have become a badge conference, so there are badges everywhere for you to find, and see if you can manage to collect them all. Right, so on to our first presentation. Just to kind of set the scene, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the DPC for anybody who's not familiar with the organisation. This is our 20th year. We were established in 2002, basically to enable digital preservation collaboration amongst our members and the broader community. At that point, I think we had members in the low teens, and we're up to just under 140 members now around the world. I will not say the exact number because it actually seems to be increasing day by day at the moment, and I believe there's a new member going to be announced today, in fact. The members are in 19 countries, and we now have 11 members of staff, which is big growth. When I came on board in 2011, there was 2 members of staff at the DPC, and my colleague and I that joined then were 3 and 4, but yet we're up to 11 now in the UK, the Netherlands and Australia. And our kind of main mission is about building a welcoming and inclusive global community that works together to bring about a sustainable future for our digital assets. So that's why we've put a lot of time into developing these types of resources around continuous improvement, to help people be able to build their capacity for digital preservation work and to understand how to do that over time. And our aims are really around kind of 5 key strategic areas. We do work around developing a welcoming and inclusive community. We undertake advocacy work both internally with our members and externally to the broader community and kind of to stakeholders within digital preservation world. My kind of area, and along with Amy, is we are here to facilitate workforce development and the upskilling of the staff at our members. And we also support the development of good practice, which is Jen and colleagues who look after that. And that's across a broad range of digital preservation activities. And then our 5th one is that we aim to be an accountable, sustainable and dynamic organisation. So kind of lofty aspirations there. So getting on to continuous improvement itself, when I started in digital preservation 16 years ago, I found it incredibly difficult to plan or make policy around digital preservation issues because there really wasn't a lot of standards and guidance and help that was available to us then. And there really were kind of even fewer tools, certainly no kind of repository systems as we know them now. And it was also kind of harder to find community support. So as I kind of said, we've only been around 20 years. So the DPC was still in its kind of fledgling status at that point. So we really struggled in kind of how to translate theory into practice. So anybody playing conference bingo, here is your first mention of OIS, but you are not getting the diagram. So I don't know if that means you get to cross off a square or not. So basically what I relied on at that point was the OIS model and the 10 principles of trusted repository design. And that was they were my two go-tos. I didn't have much else to help guide me in how I planned and progressed my digital preservation work. But thankfully, things have changed. So we've got a lot more standards now. We've got guidance and publications, lots of stuff to help us around training and education opportunities as well. And there is an increasingly growing marketplace of solutions and tools to help us do the kind of practical technological stuff as well. And I think we'll find over the course of this week, digital preservation has become a vibrant and welcoming community, and there's lots of opportunity for peer support and kind of discussing what you're doing with other people who are facing the same issues. But more choices and more information creates its own problems and questions that you have to face. So what exactly is right for your organisation in terms of digital preservation, and how do you plan for ongoing development of your digital preservation capacity? And that's where continuous improvement can come in. It's about the kind of ongoing effort to improve products, services or processes. And it's a process that's used across lots of different kind of disciplines and areas. And I think it's particularly relevant as well to digital preservation. And one of the things at the core of it is really about getting better all the time. So it's about understanding where you are and how you can progress forward. And one of the acronyms that is used within the kind of generic continuous improvement theory is PDCA, which stands for plan, do, check, adjust. So it's about planning for what you're hoping to do, having a bit of a test of it, that do stage, checking to see what's working well, adjust it, and then putting it into practice. And within continuous improvement, it does recommend that you can have either improvements that are incremental, so small changes that happen over time, or you can go for big breakthrough changes. For me in digital preservation, I think most of the time we're best to focus on incremental changes, making those kind of smaller ones that can help us moving forward. But you will find there are times where you'll have breakthrough changes as well. So actually managing to procure a repository system can be a big breakthrough change that people will have in their digital preservation training. And one phrase that I came across a few times while looking at continuous improvement to prepare this presentation was, if you aren't failing, you aren't trying. And I think that's a really important motto to have, particularly in digital preservation. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to try things that maybe don't work. At the DPC, we have member events that are officially called Digital Preservationists Anonymous, but unofficially within the DP staff, we refer to them as Fail Club. And it's really about bringing people together to talk about what's gone wrong in a kind of confidential place and being able to get peer support and advice on how to move forward. And I think sharing the things that go wrong often help us to learn more than sharing the things that have gone right. So why we think it's important to use a continuous improvement approach for digital preservation? Well, it is going to help facilitate that incremental approach to planning and development, which is particularly useful when we are facing multifaceted issues such as digital preservation. There's so much going on, so many different elements of it. So if we can break it down into smaller chunks and start to make progress that way, it's going to be really great because we can start to show smaller wins and things seem more achievable. And that setting those achievable targets is really important because otherwise digital preservation can be incredibly overwhelming. It might seem just too much of a task to face. And we find, particularly kind of anecdotally, that people we talk to at the beginning of their journey tend to be like that. They'll stick their heads in their sand because they don't know where to begin. They think it's too big, so they'll just keep putting it off and off. So being able to have a framework that allows you to make incremental steps forward and set achievable targets is going to make it seem more realistic and more doable. And it can also be really useful for advocacy as well, because if you can show that you're making kind of small wins and kind of actual progress, then that's going to help you perhaps make the case for digital preservation and bring more resources into your organisation. I want to pause here, though, and talk for a little bit about the ideas of good practice versus best practice. And this is something we talk about a lot at the DPC. Because I think we all agree there that aiming for best practice can be a fool's errand, that it can end up being self-defeating, and that you're setting yourself a target that you might never actually be able to achieve. So we always talk about good practice rather than best practice at the DPC. And it allows you more scope to consider things like your own organisational context, the resources that you actually have available to do digital preservation, what your local aims and requirements are, and ultimately to kind of set your own goals for what is good enough for digital preservation. Not everybody is looking to do gold standard digital preservation, because you're not always going to have the resources to be able to do that. We're not all going to be able to pass an ISO 16363 audit. And to be honest, I don't think we should really be aiming for that. So I think having that idea in your head that you're always going for good practice rather than best practice is the more healthy approach to digital preservation. So, looking specifically now at continuous improvement for digital preservation, there are a variety of different options of kind of frameworks and standards and guidance that you can think about using for the process. And they roughly fall into kind of two categories. There is the maturity models and then also the certification standards. In terms of maturity modelling, I've listed kind of 4 of the key ones here that you might think about looking at. So the NDSA levels of digital preservation are very much kind of more on the kind of technology process focus side of things. So if that's what you're wanting to do an analysis of, then the NDSA levels is probably a good one for you. It's also very accessible because it basically all fits onto one sheet of paper. So it doesn't take much to get you going to be able to do that process. There is also, a couple of years ago, produced the DFL levels of Born Digital Access. So if you're doing any work specifically on providing access to digital content, then that's the maturity model for you if you want to hone in on that area. If you are an organisation that is very much invested in OAIS model and all that goes along with that, then the maturity model you probably want to look at is the Digital Preservation Capability Maturity Model. It looks to take a holistic approach across the broad range of digital preservation activities, but very closely aligned to OAIS. And then last but not least, the one that we will be going to be covering today via Jen is our own rapid assessment model at the DPC. Which sets out, again, a holistic look at digital preservation, looking at how you can develop your capacity over time and the kind of variety of different issues and processes and procedures that you need to put in place. The other side of the coin is certification, and there's kind of 3 main certification standards that I'll highlight today. The first is the Core Trust Seal, which is perhaps the kind of easier access kind of version of certification. All 3 do allow you to have some kind of level of external kind of audit and kind of review of how you're doing. Core Trust Seal is 16 criteria, at least I think it still has 16, I really hope so, Jen's nodding good, about the kind of different things that you should be doing within digital preservation. And then kind of larger standards, we have the International ISO 16363 standard, which came out of the TRAC Trusted Repository Audit Checklist, which in turn came out of OIS, and also the German standards DIN 31644. So those are the kind of options that you might think about using in terms of providing you with a framework for continuous improvement for digital preservation. I'm going to put my hand up right now and say, I much prefer maturity models, and that's part of the reason that we're here today. I think they're more flexible, I think they're more achievable, and I think that they're kind of less terrifying than in some ways the checklists, particularly things like ISO 16363 are. Who wants to be trying to meet a standard with well over 100 criteria that you've got to tick off a kind of yes or no to? I'd rather have the flexibility of being able to set where I want to be within my digital preservation journey. And that's that maturity models give you that option to do that. And they do also align well with continuous improvement. So you're moving through levels of progress rather than that pass-fail of certification, setting your own targets, and also allowing kind of the identification of gaps. So where are we quite mature here, and then we've discovered we're not quite as mature over here, so maybe that's where we need to put our resources. And they produce great results as well that can be used for things like advocacy for additional resources or helping to establish trust in our capability to do digital preservation work. And so those are the kind of main reasons that we have created DPC RAM. Hopefully after today you'll find it's a really useful resource and be out to look at using it. Also, we're covering today our new competency framework, and I would say that none of this works without skilled staff. They, for me, are the most fundamental resource for doing digital preservation well. And that's no surprise that I will say that as Head of Workforce Development for the DPC, but I think it's a message that we hear echoed through a variety of different kind of models and frameworks and standards and publications. And at the core of that, digital preservation is a multidisciplinary undertaking. It requires collaboration from people from different skill sets to be able to do digital preservation. So therefore, it's really important to actually know what skills we need for doing digital preservation. And the flip side of that, then, what skills we might need to add to our team to be able to continue to develop our digital preservation capacity. And that is why we have developed DPC competency framework and the competency audit toolkit, which we'll be hearing about in the second portion of the day. So that's really all I wanted to cover in our kind of brief introduction to continuous improvement. I think we're going to stop now and see if there's any questions at this point before I pass over to Jen. Okay, if there's not, oh, Remco's got his hand up at the back.
I just wanted to make a comment or a follow-up remark that I think, in fact, you will both need certification and competency modeling because certification is just a one moment in time where someone looks at your organization and marks it, and you need this whole continuous improvement to actually be able to score higher and higher in your certification. So I think they are combined, and you should start probably by seeing where you are in your competency.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for certification. I would agree for that. And I would never advocate that we abandon certification entirely. But it is, as kind of Remco said there, it's a point to aim to in the future where we look to build capacity through the use of things and continuous improvement like maturity models. And then if your organisation requires it, you might look to then gain some kind of certification.
The reason I feel that the maturity modeling is so much more important than the certification, while the certification creates all sorts of technical benchmarks, is that it's fine for people like us in this room that can afford to do these kind of things, can come to conferences like this, have the resources. But if we're trying to truly have digital preservation throughout cultural heritage in the world, there are a lot of little smaller places and things that can't afford, and so they're going to need good enough. They're going to need, how do I mature through this and not just, this incomprehensible, unattainable certification they're never going to do. So this is a lot of the more doing, I think, than that we need to be able to profess out there.
Yeah, I would agree. Like a small local authority archive here in the UK is never going to achieve ISO 16360 certification. So having the maturity models is giving them the scope to set goals and move forward with what they're doing. Okay, I think in that case, I'm going to hand over to Jen, who's going to take us through DPC RAM.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jen Mitcham. I'm going to talk about DPC RAM today, and this is what we're going to be covering in this session. So I'm going to start off with a short introduction to DPC RAM. This is very much aimed at people that know nothing about it. So I know looking around the room, there's lots of people that I know have done RAM, they know a lot about it, so just bear with me while I go through the basics, because I think there might be some people who don't. There's time for Q&A. As mentioned before, we have the Slido. Is it called Slido? Slido. You're welcome to ask questions through that. Also, we can take questions from the floor. And then, because this is a workshop or a tutorial, you will have a chance to have a go at RAM in the room, just have some quiet time to work through it. And then we'll do some benchmarking so you can compare your results with others in the room. A few slides around what's next to wrap up, and then we'll go into the first break. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I think Sharon's already introduced DPC RAM, so these slides are slightly redundant, but it's our rapid assessment model, so it's a maturity model for digital preservation. And like any maturity model, it can really help you work out where you are and where you would like to be in digital preservation. And doing this helps with all elements of your digital preservation work, really. It can be helpful for advocacy, it can be helpful for bidding for resources, it can be helpful for thinking about what staff skills you might need to be able to do digital preservation. We'll be on to that in the second part of this tutorial. So, of course, as Sharon said, RAM isn't the only model you can use to measure how well you're doing in digital preservation. This slide gives a sense of how RAM fits into that broader landscape of models and frameworks. But note, this isn't the whole picture. I've just put 4 on this slide. So we're moving on the one end from the... so this is the less terrifying end of the spectrum, as Sharon would say. And we start off with the NDSA levels of preservation, which is a great, really simple model to pick up and measure yourself against. It fits on one sheet of paper, really quick and easy to use. Then we've got DPC RAM, which I think is more holistic than the NDSA levels, still quite easy to use, but perhaps takes a little bit longer. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the actual certification standards. So starting with Core Trust Seal, which I guess is the simplest certification standard, but it's going to take quite a long time to achieve. And then at the far end, ISO 16363, which is the really sort of heavyweight, complex standard. So that's just to give a bit of a sense of where RAM fits in. So a short history of RAM. So RAM was developed as part of a collaborative project with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority in the UK. In fact, we launched it at iPres 2019 in Amsterdam in the lightning talks. I don't know if any of you were there, but my colleague Paul Wheatley released RAM to the wild in the lightning talks 3 years ago. When we developed it, we were keen not to completely reinvent the wheel and develop a brand new maturity model. So instead of starting from scratch, we decided to use an existing model as a starting point. And we really liked the model that Adrian Brown had published in his book, Practical Digital Preservation. So we decided that we would pick that model up and work with it, with Adrian's blessing and help actually to develop that further into what's now called DPC RAM. And developing it really was a collaborative exercise, so a member of our community even named it. Someone else added visualizations to the worksheet. We got lots of great comments and feedback, so very much a collaborative creation exercise. When we developed the model, we had some really clear principles in mind, and perhaps the most important were the first 2 on this slide. Because we were doing this as part of our work with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, we'd really kind of struggled to find a maturity model that quite fitted the context of the NDA. They're quite a unique organisation. So a lot of existing maturity models were much more focused on sort of more standard or typical memory institution. And we wanted to create a model that was applicable for all organisations, no matter what size, no matter what context or sector, and also for all types of data that had long-term value. So we also wanted the model to be preservation, strategy, and solution agnostic. So we wanted it to support different ways of doing digital preservation, not just one way of doing digital preservation. It very much had to be based on existing good practice, not best practice, as Sharon's already talked about. And we did want it to be simple to understand and quick to apply. And it was important to us as well that the model had continuous improvement at its heart, at its core really. So we wanted people to use it not as a one-off exercise, but for it to be a tool for regular check-in. So the model is freely available online to everybody. You can find it on our website. I think the link's in our collaborative note document, if you want to find it there. So when you go to find DPC RAM on our website, the important thing to look at is this, which is the model itself, and there's also a worksheet to download here. If English isn't your first language and you want to look for one of the translations of RAM, just scroll down on that page and you'll find RAM translated into, I believe, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Japanese, Turkish. Is that right, Amy? If you're wondering why your language isn't there, it's just purely because no one's volunteered to translate it for us yet, and we would love to work with you on that if you want to help us with another translation of RAM. So what does it look like? So RAM is in 11 sections, all covering different areas of digital preservation. So the first 6 sections here on this side, these are what we call the organisational capabilities. So these are the sections which look at how well your organisation is set up to do digital preservation. So we're looking at things here like whether you have the staff, the resources, whether your policies are in place, whether you've got appropriate IT infrastructure and support. So those kind of things that you need to be able to get started. And then the other 5 capabilities of RAM are what we call the service capabilities. And these are much more the hands-on parts of digital preservation. So they're the things that you're actually doing to the digital content in order to preserve it and provide access to it. So they include things like metadata, bitstream preservation, much more sort of hands-on stuff. And for each of those 11 sections, you simply just work through them and decide where you are using the scale, which is on the top there. So from 0 to 4, you assign yourself a value as to where you are now. And with RAM, you would also then go through and assign yourself a target score. So it's not just about where you are now, it's about where you would like to be as well. So each maturity level for each section has a basic definition. So the table here shows the definitions for the organisational viability section of RAM. So minimal awareness kind of means you've not really heard of it, you've not really come across this as a concept or something that needs to be done. Awareness is where you're aware that something needs to happen, but you haven't really started acting on it yet. At the basic level, you've started to do some stuff, but perhaps not an awful lot just yet, but you've started to put some basic stuff in place. The managed level, you are working in digital preservation in a much more managed way, so you've got a more cohesive set of policies or workflows in place. And optimized is kind of the top level, that's like the gold standard really in RAM. And that's where you're working a lot more proactively in that area. So you're not only doing things really, really well, but you're almost working out what's going to happen in the future and responding to that in a proactive way. So the first 2, 0 and 1, I think it's fairly easy to work out if you are or aren't sitting within that kind of scoring bracket. For the other ones, from 2 to 4, I think it's a bit harder to work out, are we basic or are we managed? So what we've done within the model is create a whole load of examples which just give a sense of what that might look like for your organisation. So here's an example of some of those examples. So here's an example of what the basic level might look like for organisational viability. So at the basic level of organisational viability, you might expect to see that you've got some engagement from senior managers. You would hope to see that staff had assigned responsibilities and perhaps just as important, the time to undertake them. A budget for digital preservation should have been allocated, but it says maybe time limited. So it might be a project budget for digital preservation rather than something that you can guarantee is going to carry on. and staff development requirements have been identified. So that just gives a sense of what you might need to have in place in order to get to that basic level of RAM. But the most important thing to note is what's at the bottom of that slide there, which is that these are only examples. So I know it's very, the most obvious way to use this almost is as a checklist to go through and tick, 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 tick. But we want to encourage users of RAM to challenge those examples a little bit at times, use them if they're useful to you, but if you actually start thinking about your organisation and thinking, actually, we don't really need that in our organisation, and we're doing this instead, which we think takes us to a similar point, we're totally happy for you to use it in that way. And if you are using it in that way, we'd love to have your feedback as well, because if you're coming up with something new that actually might be applicable to other organisations as well, we might be able to include it within the model next time. So how to use RAM. It's really simple, really straightforward. So you need to work out where you sit currently. We do encourage you to be honest and realistic when you do this. So any maturity modelling exercise is quite a subjective process, I think. But if you do score yourself higher than you really are, I think you're only cheating yourself. So I think it's better to really think critically about what you're doing and what you've got in place, and also about what needs to be put in place to move you forward. There's no half marks in RAM, unfortunately. That's a question we do get asked. So if you're almost at a level 3, but you're not quite because you know you need to put something in place, then keep yourself down at a 2 for now. And then hopefully next time, when you do a RAM assessment, you can move up to a 3, because hopefully you'll have improved by that point. And as I said, don't take the examples too literally. They are only examples. And then the next step is to work out where you would like to be. So for all those 11 sections, you just work out, yeah, we're here, but we'd actually like to be here. And again, I'd encourage you to be realistic. As Sharon said, you don't need to assume that you have to go for the top at every point. It's not about reaching the gold standard necessarily. And it's important also not to set yourself up for failure. So if your organisation is never going to be optimized level of RAM, don't set that as your target. Set yourself a more achievable target that you're more likely to reach. So just a couple of things to think about before you were to start a RAM assessment. So firstly, consider the scope of your assessment. And I guess this is the same for any maturity modelling exercise or certification exercise, thinking about what part of your organisation you're actually measuring, and also what content you're actually measuring. So it could be that you're measuring your whole organisation, or it could be that you're measuring just the section that deals with digital archives, perhaps. And there's no hard and fast rules here. It's really up to you as to what's going to be most useful for you to do. And then it is quite helpful, I think, to establish which digital assets are in scope. So you might have lots of different streams of digital content coming into your organisation, and they might not all be treated the same. So you might have a web archiving section that does things slightly differently. You might have digitization or digitized content that's held in a slightly different way. So take some time to think about what content streams that you're going to be measuring as part of this assessment as well, because I think that would be helpful before you get started. It can make a big difference to the answers to your assessment. But remember as well that you can do more than one RAM assessment for your organisation if you want to. So if you wanted to do one RAM assessment for born digital content and one for digitised, that's fine. Do whatever works for you. Before you start, you might also want to consider the time frame for your targets. So with RAM, we encourage you to set targets, to think about where you want to be. But it's good to have a time frame, a target date. And again, there's no hard and fast rules for this. So some people go for targets a year ahead of now, some go for 3 years, some go for 5, some go for just some specified date in the future, and that's fine too. And sometimes it might be the best thing to do when you work through RAM for the first time, is just think about unspecified. And then as you start to work through it again or review it, think about, no, actually, we need to be doing this in 3 years or 5 years. So when you're thinking about timeframes, think about if your organisation has some kind of forward planning period or strategy that you want to align with, or perhaps some review cycle that it would be useful to fit in with. So as I mentioned, there is a worksheet that goes alongside RAM. So do download this today if it's helpful to you. You don't have to use it. If you want to use pen and paper or any other method of recording your RAM assessment, that's absolutely fine. But hopefully you would also find this quite helpful. So there's some boxes at the top here to fill in. So when you're doing the workshop today, if you're using this, you can largely ignore these for now, just skim over them, apart from there is scope of assessment and type of content being assessed. So I mentioned those as being two things you might want to think about specifically. Also, time frame for target levels might be a useful one to think about. And then when you get to the main worksheet, so there's the 11 sections of RAM down the side. You get to pick from a drop-down list your current level from 0 to 4. So that's fairly straightforward. There's a free text box here. Why did you select this level? I really encourage you to fill that in with some of your rationale. So if you were just to pick from the drop-down list, say, yeah, we're a 2 here, but you then didn't go on to say, well, I think we're a 2 because we've got this in place and this in place, but we're not a 3 because we haven't done this. It's so useful when you need to go back to your RAM assessment in the future, or perhaps when you want to share it with colleagues so they can actually see your rationale. And then likewise on the other side, target level, just select from a drop-down list from 0 to 4 where you think you'd like to be. And there's another free text field, what needs to be in place to get here. So you could just start to note some actions, some things that you know need to be put in place in order to reach that level. But really, I mean, it's not an assessment, it's not an exam. You're not being graded for this, you do it for your own benefit. So fill these in as kind of richly as you want to and is useful to you. And if you use that worksheet, the nice thing about the worksheet, I think, is that there's another tab of the worksheet that creates these visualizations for you on the fly. So as soon as you start entering scores into the sheet, another tab's creating these graphs for you. So you've got a radar chart here, which nicely shows a line for where you are now, where you'd like to be. It's a really clear and easy way, I think, to see the gaps, see where the biggest gaps are in your digital preservation capabilities. Same with the bar chart on the other side. And these are great for sharing with colleagues as well. So if colleagues want a quick snapshot of where you are, how you're doing, they can look at these diagrams and get a pretty clear picture of how things are going. So that was the whirlwind introduction to RAM. Hopefully that made perfect sense. But if not, or if there's any questions, I'd be very happy to answer those before we go into actually having a go. Is there anything on the online? Oh, Remco.
Yes, hi. Remco again, National Archives of the Netherlands. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself last time. Do you as DPC share any filled out RAM models from members or open source results that people are willing to share?
We don't know. So that's a good question. And something I was going to talk about later on was how we use RAM with DPC members. So I'll save all that information for then. But yes, we do collect in information from DPC members, but we treat it confidentially. And what we do is we aggregate the results into a kind of a summary that we can share with members so that they can benchmark against it. But we don't share it outside the membership. Apart from on Tuesday, tomorrow, I'm giving a talk about RAM, to talk about the first 3 years of RAM. And one of the things that I will talk about is just some headline summaries of how members have scored with RAM over the last 3 years, but not giving away any names or really many details at all. Roxana, is the microphone there? Thank you.
Hi, Roxana Maurer from the National Library of Luxembourg. I don't actually have a question, but sort of an answer to Remco. So the first time I used the DPC RAM, I was thinking that, yeah, something like this would definitely be really useful. But all the examples that were in the two documents, in the spreadsheet and in the accompanying PDF were really useful and were all I needed. So basically you have other answers, but in the form of examples. And plus, if you're a DPC member, you can also send your DPC RAM to the DPC and ask if they have another institution of your type, like for example in our case National Library or University Library or so on, and if they do, they can send you anonymized, not answers, but a bit the general way, so that's also really useful, but again, that's not public information, you're going to receive it as a DPC member. Thank you.
Thanks, Roxana. Any other questions? I should say as well, we have got several blog posts that members have put out on our blog where they talk about their results and they actually share their scores. So obviously, if members are happy to do that, it's their information and they can share that, but we just don't share on their behalf. There's a question at the back there. That's Liz.
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz Kata, International Atomic Energy Agency. More of a comment than a question, but what would you recommend for institutions that say have maybe a separate IT department? So for me, that's always the question when I'm going through the DPC RAM and the organizational aspects, because some things I control in the archives, right, and other things are our IT department, and I usually do a mix of both. Like, okay, you know, our IT capacities for, you know, backup recoveries is pretty good because we have a pretty strong IT department, but they don't care at all about checksum. So, but anyways, what would be the recommendation, maybe?
Oh, I think it depends. I think you just need to answer the questions to reflect how things are currently. I mean, there's certainly there's a section of RAM that looks specifically at bitstream preservation, and if you had concerns about checksums, I think that's where your score might go down if you felt that that wasn't being addressed properly. But yeah, the IT capability section of RAM is really looking at whether you have enough tools and support to be able to do digital preservation properly, because that's a real key area of digital preservation. So I guess you would score, I don't know, middling probably for that kind of scenario, Liz.
Hi, Tricia Patterson, Harvard Library. I was wondering, is there, I understand obviously the need to keep things private in terms of the institutions that are turning in their scores and sharing them that way. Is there an opportunity, or are you envisioning opportunities for people to be able to share how they went from a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 4, you know, the strategies that they employed to fill in their gaps with each other?
That's a great question, Trish. Thank you. Yes, so we run an annual event. It's actually just for DPC members. Sorry, but I'll come to what we do for everyone in a moment. But we run an annual event called RAM Jam, and that's where we do just that. So we bring people together and we look specifically at members who've managed to move up from like a 1 to a 2. And we bring them in to talk about how they did it and what tips and tricks they have to share. It's a really great event. So we're going to be running that again in December this year, looking at how people got from basic to managed, I think, and sharing their tips. But what we're also doing is we're bringing all that information together into an online resource. So we'd like to have a whole set of online resources around RAM. So we can say, like, you know, for organisational viability, here's all the tips that we've collected. Here's the kind of the great case studies of how people have moved forward. And here's the resources that you might need to access. So and that will be available to the whole community. So hopefully that would be helpful. Oh, one more question, and then we'll move into the workshop. Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
Myrène Appert, HEC Montréal. Just piggybacking maybe on Eliz's question because, well, IT is indeed very separate. But I was wondering if anyone in the room or you have any, if you had heard of people actually using the DPC RAM to advocate with their IT and how did that go? Because I feel like some of these concerns, it's like, hey, we have a model here, it's recognized by people. So if anyone has anything about that, I'd be all ears. Thank you.
That's it. Another great question, and I love that idea. So I love the idea of using RAM to advocate with colleagues, to advocate with IT specifically. I don't know of any case studies. I think we might have one here. Can we have the microphone over here? Thank you.
Hello, Garth Stewart, National Records of Scotland. So we're trying to do that because NRS is quite a large organisation and does quite a few things, just one of which is digital archiving. And so the only way we really get traction and get investment and notice is if we kind of raise the risk levels in corporate risk registers and so on. Because DPC RAM is so well laid out and is so systematic, it gives a really nice evidence trail that we can track year on year, and that actually allows us not to sound like, you know, we're playing the violin again, but we're actually having concerns around storage or resources or whatever. It's not to say we're doing it, I have to be honest and say it, I failed to do DPC RAM this year due to other things going on, but it's definitely there as the kind of cornerstone for us to try and make ourselves more visible to the senior management. And because it's becoming, you know, basically a standard for these sorts of things, it's definitely, I think, working. So, yeah, we can certainly talk more if you like.
That's a great example. Thanks for sharing that, Garth. There's one over here.
Hi, Kimberly Dye, State Library of South Australia. Similarly, we've used the RAM as part of a range of tools to advocate to get our IT team to do the Novice to Know-How course. So that sort of made us all sort of join the language barriers together. IT speak isn't necessarily DigPres speak, and it's got people more in tune with what we're trying to do in different parts of the library.
That's another great example. Thanks, Kimberly. Okay, I think we should move on to the workshop bit, but that's not to say there won't be other opportunities for questions along the way. So do ask them, do continue to put your hand up once we go into the workshops. We can chat to you then as well, and also using the online thing that I've forgotten the name of. Okay, so next slide. Right. So this is your chance to have a go. So this is a workshop or a tutorial. So we wanted to give you the opportunity to do some hands-on work with RAM. So here's what you need to do. So you need to go to the DPC RAM web pages and download RAM if you haven't already. Feel free to download the worksheet if you want to use the worksheet, but if you'd rather do it another way, that's absolutely fine. Especially if you're just working with one screen, it might be easier to you know, write it down on pen and paper.
A limited number of printed copies here, if anybody would like one.
Oh, great, thanks, Sharon. Sharon has some copies of a printed worksheet if you would like to use that to note down your RAM assessment. Thanks, Sharon. Remember, there are translations of RAM further down that page, so do download one of those if you would prefer to use one of those. So when you come to actually look at that PDF file, which is the RAM model itself, there's lots of useful information in there, but you can ignore a lot of that, skip straight to page 8, so that's where the model actually starts. So I've told you all the information you need to use in order, you need to know in order to use it for now. So whiz straight to page 8 and start looking at organisational viability and assessing yourself against that. And when using the worksheet, just remember to have a little bit of a think about scope and target dates, as I mentioned before. Don't need to worry too much about everything at the top there, but perhaps just give some thought to those two things. So I'm going to let you work through this on your own for probably 20 minutes.
How long to do for the last bit?
Sorry?
How long to do for the last?
I think maybe 15.
15 minutes then.
15 minutes, okay. So just 15 minutes just working on this on your own. And then we will come back to do some benchmarking with Mentimeter. So Remco's question about sharing information with other people, we can actually do that anonymously in the room today for those who've had a go at RAM, just with those first sections. So I don't expect you to have finished a RAM assessment by the end of this, but I expect you to have just had a go at a few sections and maybe got a clear sense of whether this model is useful to you, whether it's something that you want to carry on working through in your own time. And I know there's also lots of people in this room who've already done a RAM assessment. I can tell from the kind of questions and comments and also from your faces that I know that you're already familiar with this. So you're not coming at this fresh today. Feel free to just dig out your old RAM assessment and have a look at it. Or perhaps you could think about doing a different RAM assessment, looking at a different scope, potentially, if that's useful to you. So, any questions? People want the Wi-Fi. Oh, yes.
Just one or two people maybe have picked it up.
Okay. So if anyone needs to connect to Wi-Fi, is it TIC conference? And the password is Kelvin Grove with a capital K. Is that right? Kelvin Grove. So do feel free to come and talk to us as you're working through RAM. If you've got any questions, just come and find us at the front and we'll be really happy to talk to you. Thank you. I don't know how far you've managed to get, but we have created a Mentimeter just to get a sense of where you got to, and perhaps you've done one section of RAM or two. I don't know, but I'll find out soon. And we can just do a bit of benchmarking in the room anonymously so people get a sense of where they sit in comparison to other people. That's the idea anyway. So if you have a device, a phone, a mobile, a computer, laptop or whatever, if you could go to www.menti.com and there's a code up there, so you type the code in. It's too high, I can barely read it. Hopefully you can read it better than I can. And I can see that some people are there already. So the first question is just, what is your experience with RAM prior to this session? So have you never heard of it? Have you used it frequently? Have you used it once? Is it possible to see that on this screen? So otherwise, it's really hard to look. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. That's better. Great. So it's good to see so many people taking part in the Mentimeter. Oh, that's great. So we've got 29 people who'd heard of it but not tried to use it before. So that's good. And 14 who'd never heard of it, so trying to use it for the first time. We've also got some experienced RAM users in the room. So 10 people have used it more than once. Hats off to you. And 8 people have used it just once. We haven't got any others. So thanks for that. We'll move on to the next one, which is just about where you got up to today. So how far did you get today if you were doing RAM? And I know not everyone will have been having a go if you've already familiar with the model. Oh, we've got a real spread. So some people got all the way to the end. Did you do that today? Really? So I'm not sure I believe you. Six people maybe have come with one they prepared earlier. That's my assumption. But the winner of the race, I think, is the 2 people that got to bitstream preservation. Well done. That was super fast maturity modelling. And a lot of people only got to section A, and that's absolutely fine too, because we really didn't have much time at all, and quite a wide spread, really. It's interesting. Okay. So we will do some anonymous benchmarking, and we'll perhaps just go up to the legal basis. We'll see how we get on. So looking at the first section of RAM, which is organisational viability, where is your organisation now? What did you pick? So you've got a really nice spread here between the different scores. So the most popular currently is basic level. But we've got the full set, really, the full range. So some people at minimal awareness, other people fully optimised, and everything in between. So that's good to see. So let's go on to your target levels for organisational viability. So where would you like to be? So some of you are probably already at your targets. There's quite a lot of people aiming for optimised, and a few also aiming for managed. Some wanted to get to basic, and some just wanting to get to awareness even. And actually, it's a little bit arbitrary because, if you remember, I asked you to think about the time frame for your targets. So if you're thinking about some unspecified point in the future, you might be aiming a little bit higher than if you're thinking about simply where do I want to get to next year? Well, I just want my organisation to have an awareness of this area. Okay. Interesting. So managed has become the most popular here in terms of targets. So on to section B, policy and strategy. So I think most of you will have got to this section. Where is your organisation now? So how did you score yourself for policy and strategy? So this section isn't just about policies and strategies, it's also about documentation of workflows and procedures and all sorts of other things. We've got the full spread again. More people at minimal awareness than on the previous slide, I think, and less optimised. And the most popular, again, is basic in the middle, somewhere in the middle. Okay. So let's have a look at where you want to be for policy and strategy. Managed level, very popular. So it's nice to see that you are really kind of thinking about target levels, and I know with some models it's almost automatic just to go straight for the top. Like we want to be at gold standard. We want to be aiming for level 4. That's where we should be. But actually, we do encourage you to look at the examples in the model and think about, no, but really, where do I want to be? Where's realistic for me? So it's great to see people really taking that on board. Okay, and we'll just do legal basis. I guess some people might drop off now if you haven't got to this section. But where's your organisation now for legal basis? This is sometimes a funny one when I look at results, because some people just automatically score really highly for this one. Because they've got everything in place already for physical materials, and there's not perhaps so much that you need to do differently for digital. Or maybe I'm wrong on that one. But some organisations just seem to have this nailed and seem to score really highly. But actually within this room, less so perhaps. We've got a small proportion of people that are optimised. Most people are at basic again, but we've got a full spread. And what's your target level for legal basis? Where do you think you want to be? So managed is very popular. Some people aiming for the top, some people aiming for basic, one person at least aiming for awareness. Okay. Yeah, we've got the scores are dropping off a bit now because I guess a lot of people haven't got to this section. But hopefully it just gives you a sense of how you sit compared to others in the room. And I think that's quite helpful to see, is to have that chance to benchmark anonymously and perhaps not to talk about your scores, because you might not want to talk about your scores, but to be able to get a sense of where you sit compared to others. And hopefully the fact you're not alone at whatever level you're at. Okay, so I'm just going to skim through the next slides, so don't try and answer them, because it'll all get confusing. But I'll skim through these to the end. I was obviously very optimistic about how far we would get in this session. Look at that. Okay. So this is just a kind of a follow-up question to see what you intend to do after this session with RAM. So perhaps you've just had a chance to get started with a RAM assessment, but you think, oh, that was quite useful. I might go away and finish that in my own time. You might have had questions arising from the work in this tutorial that you think you need to go and ask your colleagues. So it's unusual for one person to have all the answers in a RAM assessment and to be able to do that on their own. So you might need to go away and ask colleagues. Obviously, I guess for most of you, doing a RAM assessment has highlighted some gaps. So highlighted that perhaps you're not where you would like to be. And to create a plan to address those gaps might be a good action going forward. RAM is a great communication tool, so we already talked about that in the Q&A session. So I would definitely encourage you to go away and use RAM as a communication tool with your colleagues. Take the little illustrations and take it to your colleagues and talk about where you are, where you'd like to be, and perhaps more importantly, what you need to get there to be able to get to where you want to be. Which comes on to the next point, which is using RAM results in a digital preservation business case. So if you find you need some resource to actually move forward with RAM, you might be able to use the RAM statistics in a business case for digital preservation. And the last one on this slide is about using RAM regularly to check in on progress. So as I said, this whole session is all about continuous improvement. We're happy for you to use RAM as a one-off exercise if you want to, but we'd much prefer that you used it regularly. So using it perhaps on an annual basis or a biannual basis to check in and see how you get to and see if you're getting nearer your targets or if your targets need to change. So, that's great to see that lots of people want to carry on working on their RAM assessment after this tutorial. That's really encouraging. So hopefully you'll go away and do that. We've also got lots of people wanting to use RAM to communicate with colleagues, which is great. And a few saying that, or quite a lot saying they want to use RAM regularly to check in on progress as well. And creating a plan as well to highlight, to address the gaps highlighted. There's lots of really high scores there, so that's really encouraging actually to see that this could be the start of something for many of you, and you might go away and use this a bit more. So this is just a free text thing. The last Mentimeter slide, which is just how did you find using DPC RAM? I know some of you have only used one section of it, so you might not have much to say about this. Oh, perfect. That's perfect. Thank you, whoever wrote Brilliant. I haven't mentioned, but I'm wearing my RAM earrings today, in respect of the sheep. I didn't bring my RAM horns. Sharon's very cross with me. I've actually got some horns. I didn't bring them, so I thought it would just be embarrassing, but I wish I had now. So this is great, a lovely feedback. It's useful, clear, thought-provoking, practical, fun and effective. Lovely, that's really nice feedback, thank you. Okay, if we could swap over to the slides, that'd be great. So I've just got some slides to show you to wrap up, just to talk about next steps with RAM and then to take us into the break, which will be in, well, very shortly actually. There's not many slides. Yeah, I'll just scoot through them. Thank you. Okay, so just a few slides to wrap up, as I said. So I think it's fair to say that actually doing the RAM assessment is the easy part. I think you found that quite quick and straightforward to do today, even though you didn't have enough time. But actually the hard bit is what you do afterwards, because that's the thing that is probably a bit more difficult and probably a bit more time consuming. So we already talked on that Mentimeter slide about some of the things that you might want to do after RAM. So sharing it with colleagues, starting a conversation is definitely something that we recommend. Including it in a business case for digital preservation is another really useful step. We have got a toolkit at the DPC for creating a business case, and that is soon to be, it's recently been updated, it's soon to be republished, so take a look out for that when it comes. Setting priorities, that's a really good thing to do after a RAM assessment, thinking about which areas you might want to work on first, what your priorities are, when you might want to achieve things, and turning that into a roadmap or a plan for moving forward. Again, a really useful exercise. You also might want to revisit your preservation policy if you have one, or create one if you haven't. We've got a toolkit for that as well, actually, and it's very closely linked with RAM, so that could be useful. So if you've already got a preservation policy, you might want to see if it really reflects where you are and where you want to be in your direction of travel. Perhaps that would be a useful thing to do as well. And then remember, this is all about continuous improvement, and this whole workshop's about continuous improvement. We encourage you to do RAM again in the future, so to repeat the exercise. So we recommend that you do RAM on an annual basis, and I know that's not the right time frame for every organisation, and really we're just happy if you stick to your own schedule and use it in a way that's useful to you. But it's definitely a process which should be repeated. And actually repeating a RAM assessment should be quicker than doing it the first time, so you should be able to do that fairly rapidly to check in on progress, see where you are, check in on your targets. So we use RAM, RAM's available to everyone, anyone can pick it up and use it, but we use it in a slightly different way with our members. So there's various sort of member benefits around RAM. So firstly, we can help members complete their RAM assessments. So any member can ask us for a chat about RAM every year. We can sit and talk through things with them. We also offer a number of events every year to help members with their RAM assessment. So I already mentioned in the Q&A, we have a RAM Jam session, thus this illustration. And that's a yearly event where we have people talking about their experiences at using RAM and sharing information and tips and advice to help the whole community move forward. We also have Rambulance surgery sessions. I think Amy was responsible for that awful pun, is that right? Ellie. Oh, it's Ellie. Sorry, Amy. Amy's quite good at RAM puns, but not this one. So yes, the Rambulance surgery session is just a drop-in for members where you can kind of drop in and chat to us and ask questions. So that's another thing we do. As already discussed, we encourage members to do a RAM annually. We send them a reminder about that, and we encourage them to share their information back with us, which we can then pull into a report that we can share back to the members. Anonymised, of course. And I am giving a paper on that tomorrow, if you're interested in coming along to that. So just to end with some nice feedback received from members, you can see people have found RAM quick and easy to use, as well as helpful and even enjoyable, somebody says. And we do like to receive all feedback, even if it's bad. Negative feedback is really helpful for us as well. If there's something that doesn't quite work with RAM, if you've got some constructive criticism or feedback, we'd love to hear it. And we plan to revise RAM whenever it needs revising. So we're already into version 2 of RAM. I imagine in the next 2 or 3 years' time, we will create a new version of RAM and we'll incorporate feedback received up until that point. So there's a link to a feedback form from our RAM main webpage. There's also, well, you can just come and chat to me at the conference or message me or chat to any of us. Really happy to hear from you. Okay, so that's everything. That's all the slides. That takes us to break time. We've got time for a question, I guess, before break, if anyone has a question. Dan.
Dan Noonan, Ohio State University. So with the versioning, I don't know, if there's significant difference between the versions, how does one track from version to version then if their maturity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when we created version 2, we were really keen that we kept the framework the same. So we kept it to 11 sections, and we kept it to those 5 maturity levels, and the 11 sections kept the same names, I think, yes. And that was deliberate because we want people to be able to kind of move from one version to another fairly seamlessly. So what we did when we updated it last time was we were just tweaking the language, making it clearer, responding to feedback we'd received. We also added in quite a few new examples, so a few new bullet points. So I don't know if moving to version 2 really impacted people, that they were like, oh, I'm not at that level anymore, because I can imagine that might be slightly irritating. Hopefully people can live with that, but I hope that sort of disruption was limited and that the overall feel of it was much the same. But yeah, it's definitely something we need to consider. Right, I think I should wrap up. So that takes us to break time. So I think we've earned a break, and oh, there you go. There's a break slide, a break and a cake. So we've all made progress with RAM today.
We do have one question on the.
Oh right, we've got a question.
How many variations of the RAM illustration are there?
How many?
How many variations?
Oh, I don't know. It's a moving target. It's a moving feast. So I don't think I can put a number on it. Maybe 20 or 30. There might be more. Yeah. Good question, thank you. Okay, so we will see you again in 30 minutes after the break, and Sharon and Amy are going to be talking to you about another tool for continuous improvement to look at, which is called CAT. And do remember, if you haven't already, to pick up badges from the front. We've got RAM badges and CAT badges for you to help yourself to. But thank you for your participation, and we'll see you after the break.
And for that part, we're going to start off. I'm going to hand over to Amy Currie, our Training and Grants Manager, and she's going to take us through an introduction to the competency framework and the individual audit element of CAT. So without further ado, Amy.
Sharon. Hi, everyone. So just to start, we're going to echo what Sharon said earlier about none of this works without skilled staff. So it's important to think about skills, and they're essential to implement and support digital preservation. And aligning with RAM, they help with building that organizational capacity. So skills, again, depend on organizational context and structure, current and planned digital preservation capabilities, and also it being essential to have collaboration among different people with different skill sets. Which is why, ta-da, here are the cats here. This is why Sharon and I helped develop the DPC competency framework and CAT. I'll first talk about the framework. So a quick intro. So it was developed to provide information on the skills, knowledge, and competencies required for successful digital preservation. And we really wanted to design it with flexibility in mind so it could be used across a range of purposes and have it be closely linked to DPC RAM to help build capabilities in organizations. These are the aims for the framework. So again, we want to have that flexibility, enough to be widely applicable, but then also useful for different types of activities across digital preservation work. We developed it from existing examples of good practice, and we've also tested it through, we held a pilot of the Competency Audit Toolkit the past couple months, and that was to help us see how it relates to good practice and also hopefully make it simple to understand and quick to apply. So just a clarification, because sometimes there are different meaning terms and they can change. Here's a quick explanation of the terms, what we mean by digital preservation, borrowing from the Digital Preservation Handbook definition of digital preservation as not just one thing, it's a series of managed activities needed to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. And so competency is something that we're approaching more broadly. So that's the combination of skills, knowledge, and behaviors that, when they're combined, allow an individual to perform the duties of their role. And skill, we're talking more specifically about ability that can be applied to complete a particular task or reach a certain outcome. So in short, having a competency in a particular area is achieved through gaining and being able to apply related skills and knowledge. Now that that's sorted, it's time to actually talk about the framework. So this is the overall structure of it. We have those 5 broader high competency areas. This gives a reference to the broader range of interdisciplinary and interrelated competencies required to undertake digital preservation work. And within those 5 areas, we have 28 skill elements. So they're arranged by competency area, but they break them down into more of those skills or more particular abilities applied to different areas of digital preservation work. So hopefully you've been able to download. We have a link to the competency framework, but here it is in table form, the framework. To just give an overview, you can see the 5 levels here. And note that only one of them has digital preservation specific, but again, as many of you are probably very aware, digital preservation is not just one thing. It needs organizational infrastructure and technological infrastructure, and it also needs ongoing advocacy and communications, as well as an awareness of the different legal and social considerations for the content and organization. And so that's why we wanted it to be this broader and more encompassing. And also, to kind of echo what Jen was saying with RAM earlier, you don't need to take it literally. This is a broader view of all the skills that we've identified that are helpful for supporting or implementing digital preservation. It's not a checklist of, we don't expect anyone to be able to have all of those competencies at the highest level. It's really about identifying them within colleagues and collaborating based on different people's skill sets. We also wanted to have a way to kind of self-assess where you're at, and that's the skill levels. Illustration here by Sharon, also available in button form up front, to identify which of the 5 skill levels you are for each of the skill elements. So we have the 5, which generally kind of align again with RAM, and they have not only a description of the level, but also what we call activity descriptors. So these are kind of verbs or words that might be used to describe activities relating to that level of skill. And what I mean by that is the table here. You can see we have those 5 skill levels from novice to expert with a short description. And then these are some words that might be used to describe the work. But again, it's context dependent, but this is kind of a way to kind of benchmark and gauge where you're at. So that was overview table, and we had our skills, but we wanted to have additional detail if needed for people to navigate the framework and kind of see if there's any examples. So for that reason, we created tables for each of the competency areas, and those have example statements to help clarify the elements, give some examples, and be able to focus on each of the competency areas and skills to kind of see what was meant by them and how they might apply. So now on to CAT. So this is the Competency Audit Toolkit. It's the complementary resource to the framework, and it was developed with the support of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, and it was a way to take the framework, which is more of a conceptual, broad thing, and make it applicable and give a methodology and a process to apply it for an individual or an organizational audit. So it provides practical, structured processes for assessing competencies, and the toolkit itself contains 3 items. It has a CAT guidance or CAT guide, which gives an overview of what it is and steps to get started, and the 2 workbooks, one of them being for an individual audit, the other one being for a wider organizational audit. Just a reminder, if it is available through the DPC website. You can download it there, as well as we have a link within the collaborative notes for DPC CAT, and it will be there right there, if you want to download it. So why use DPC CAT? Well, it helps facilitate those practical audits of your individual skills or that of an organization. Not only that, it helps in 3 particular ways. So you can look at your own skills and professional development planning, or have it be done by a colleague to audit their skills. You can also use it to look at current role descriptions or other role descriptions and compare the skills listed there to your own. And then, of course, it's linked to DPC RAM. So it's a way to look at where you are at RAM and then look through the skills to see how you might reach your target level of RAM. I mentioned the pilot. We had a pilot with different DPC member organizations, 5 of them. And this is just kind of some examples here to help get your mind working if you haven't thought about how you might want to use CAT. You can use it to think about job roles, current or one that you've seen, to see your skill and capability levels. You can use it for signposting for training. One of our participants mentioned non-technical training opportunities. It was a great way to see that wider view of digital preservation and point to things like advocacy or legal issues or something where an organization might not think of that as being digital preservation at first. And like RAM advocacy, it is something where you can kind of look at where you are and see where you want to go in terms of developing training, getting resources, thinking about salary negotiations or job descriptions, or really to show the wider view of what digital preservation entails. So, a pause here. I've given some examples of ways to consider CAT, and we'll go right into the exercise shortly. But wanted to, similar to RAM, take a moment to pause and think about, before you do an audit, why are you doing it? Are you doing this as an individual, as an organization? Are you planning on having it be done informally or formally? Or is it will be part of other activities? And who will be involved in the process? And for that reason, just kind of want to pause to think if there's any things that you want to note down before we get started on the exercise. But of course, also pause right now to ask any questions about the competency framework or CAT. I'll take that as good if it's straightforward. Yeah, great. And do what's the app as well, if there's anything. Yeah, okay. So now getting into the nitty gritty. So we'll be doing an exercise, doing an individual skills audit. But first want to do a walkthrough of the workbook that we'll be using. You may want to use CAT for different reasons, as just mentioned, but no matter what you choose, the audit process will begin the same thing with this individual audit. The individual audit will help you do a personal self-assessment, an assessment of someone else, or the assessment of multiple individuals under an organization. And so for that reason, I'll be going through and focusing on this particular workbook. So if you open up the toolkit worksheet, there is the guidance document, as mentioned, a workbook for individual audits and organizational audits. We'll be working with the individual one to assess skill levels against the skill elements of the competency framework. So we'll be focusing on identifying your current skill levels, target skill levels, and thinking about ways to apply it to those motivations mentioned earlier. And here's where you'll find it. So I will put this here in case you can't see it. If you go into the worksheet at the bottom, there is the Audit and Development Planning tab. And you can see from there, when you click onto that, at the top of the worksheet, you'll see something like this. You'll see all of the skill areas and skill elements to the left, and then there will be blank fields to the right where you can do your assessment. For the exercise, we ask that you can see right here, first, perhaps most important thing, is as mentioned, the framework is wide. It covers a whole range of skills across an organization. So the first column is determining whether this is relevant to your role or not. And from there, you can go ahead and put in your current skill level, which CAT you're at. And once you put that in, there should be automated text to have, so if you put 1, there'll be beginner, 0, novice, and so forth. So once you do that, the next column is the target skill level, which is optional, but since we're talking about continuous improvement here, this is the area where you can think about where you would like to be. And there will be auto-generated text as well for that. And then there's a column here to just kind of note about how you might increase that skill level. So for this one example, we're talking about policy in the first row. You're at beginner, but you would like a higher skill level, and something you might think is assisting the digital archivist with a forthcoming policy review. If you're not sure how to assess the skills, we've incorporated that skill level tab and table within the worksheet. So you can find that there if you want to refer to it as you're working through, as well as those descriptive tables that I had mentioned. We have one of those for each of the competency areas. So it's a way to work through. Again, don't take it literally. These are examples and suggestions to kind of see how you would assess yourself for each of them. And so with that is our exercise, which is much like before. Get in there, have a go, work through it. You can focus on one area or across the board, but the main thing is going through first and determining which are relevant, and then starting to think about where your current skill level is. While you're doing that, keeping in mind some of the aims and scopes that you had beforehand. And I'll pause again to see if we have any, oh wait, I forgot the most important thing. And put your thinking caps on. So I had to incorporate a pun and headwear somewhere. But as before, we're here. If you have any questions, you can put them online or come to us at the table. We'd be happy to answer as you work through it. How are we doing on time? Okay, so we'll do 20 minutes, so we'll say at 5 after, we'll reconvene for some discussion. I think we're at about 20 minutes. Just kind of pause for a moment to, for any questions, or also even just an opportunity to kind of share how it went, if anything you found particularly useful or challenging, and questions, usefulness, any comments, we're open. Yes.
I have a question about the private sector and public sector. If there is some difference or difficult, because I'm from public sector in Brazil, this is so difficult to do something, and I need to know if it's in other countries or specifically in Brazil, this is public sector is so difficult to do something in digital preservation.
So correct me if I'm wrong, so the question is kind of like the challenges with doing something like this in the public sector, and if that's something that's kind of shared across different organizations. Short answer would be like, it's challenging across both sectors we found with our DPC members, but if anyone else works in the public sector and wanted to add to it, or Jen and Sharon had any additional comment, but I would say that it's, for each different context, there's going to be different challenges for it. In terms of the CAT and doing an assessment like this, I think the good thing about RAM in this is that it can be as informal or as formal as you like, and the outputs and the results that you get from it, you can use for even that awareness raising of the challenges, like putting it in that context. If you don't have enough staffing, if you don't have enough resources, here's something that I've done to put forward towards it. But yeah, if anyone else share challenges, I think that's the opportunity of iPres too, is really we'll be able to. Roxana?
So I'm Roxana Maurer from the National Library of Luxembourg. We're also public sector. Just want to say that, yeah, the resources we saw this morning are from the DPC, and they have a lot of things for DPC members, but they also have really a ton of stuff for people who are not DPC members. So just go to their website and you're gonna find from what they presented now, the framework for skills, but everything from policy development to really technical things to there are really a lot of things, and you can still manage to do a lot with the resources they gathered throughout the years. And in a way, it's also members in the digital preservation community, members of the DPC, are willing to pay for the membership, but make the resources that are developed available for the general public. So I would say definitely look there. And a lot of times they also share resources done by other international or sometimes national bodies, like for example in the States, the NDSA. They also start sharing more and more resources for general public. And it's still difficult because a lot of times it's, yeah, you don't get the budget, you don't get the people, and you have to do a lot with what you have. But I would say start there, and then always connect with the community, because a lot of times I had problems and I found solutions by asking people in the community.
That's great. And I think Sharon's actually, in her slides, she's going to point to some of those free resources, including CAT, which we will make publicly. You'll have access to it here, but we'll make it publicly available in October. So the hope there is to have it be used more widely. Great. With that being said, I guess that's a good segue into Sharon, who will.
Thanks, Amy. A really good time today, guys. We might actually finish early, which I'm sure nobody is ever sad to have happened. So Sarah's given us a few spoilers about what I'm going to talk about in part of the kind of final presentation for today. But yeah, it's part of the DPC ethos really to we kind of exist to serve our members to a certain extent, but we want to make as much of that available to the wider digital preservation community as possible, particularly now that we're a charity body and not just a kind of non-profit organisation. And it benefits from the membership as well. So a lot of the resources that we are talking to you about today, and I'll share in this presentation, are developed with input from our members. So it's not just us sitting in our room coming up with ideas, it is getting lots of feedback and input from people who are actually doing digital preservation. So everything is influenced by kind of actual practice. So I'm going to finish up today by looking a little bit more on the other two sections of CAT, the Competency Audit Toolkit, and then giving a brief overview of some other DPC resources that once you've done your RAM assessment or a competency audit, you might look to these to help you to start building your capacity, so taking those kind of next steps forwards. So the first thing we're going to focus in is more on CAT, and that's going to be around looking at using CAT for a role description audit and an organisational skills audit. So the role description audit is available in the same workbook as the individual skill audit. This is really about having a look at what your current role description is and seeing if it is still actually fit for purpose in terms of what you're doing. And it's an issue that we see a lot with people working in digital preservation, is that they'll be moved from another role into digital preservation work, or that they're perhaps quite often asked to work well beyond what is actually included within their original role description, to do tasks and put in place processes and to do advocacy work and a whole bunch of other things that aren't necessarily encompassed within their original role description. So we thought it was really important to add this role description audit element to CAT. So it's there to facilitate a structured review of role description. So again, providing that framework that perhaps gives kind of meaning to the audit. So it's not just you saying, I don't feel my role description is not fit for purpose. It's saying, my role description is not fit for purpose for these reasons according to this existing framework. And hopefully that will help you out. Allow you to compare your role description with the actual tasks and responsibilities that you have on a day-to-day basis, and provide evidence that you might need for redrafting your current role description, perhaps looking for increased compensation or promotion, or potentially also making the case for more staff within your organisation. As Roxana said, there's some great resources coming out of the NDSA these days as well that are freely available. And the most recent one is results of a survey on staffing issues, which was just published last week. There's a panel on that tomorrow in the after morning break session. And you'll hear some really interesting outcomes from that. I was part of the project team that worked on the report about actually where we are in terms of staffing for digital preservation and the issues that we face. So if you're interested in that as a topic, I really encourage you to come along to the panel session. So in terms of the role description audit toolkits, the workbook is available on the role description assessment tab, which is the next one along from the individual one that Amy showed earlier. Again, it has the list of competency areas and skill elements. And then we have the actual section for you to fill out as part of your role description audit. So again, we have the same first column as we had in the individual audit, looking to actually identify if this particular skill element is relevant to the role you have at the moment or not. And then that's going to obviously tell you whether you need to complete the rest of the boxes. Then we have a bit for actually noting down what kind of related tasks or responsibilities you currently have in relation to that skill element. So are you doing things in relation to policy development or risk management to actually get a clear picture of what you do on a day-to-day basis for your digital preservation work? Then a quick check if that is actually included in your role description or not. It's just a yes, no, or I think you might have yes, no, or somewhat as the options there. And then the next column is around giving you the opportunity to put in some of the text from your role description if it exists in relation to that. So you can do then, you've got a comparison there of what you're actually doing and how it is described currently in your role description. Then you can indicate if you feel like there is an update required and make any notes against that. So hopefully, again, it's giving you that structured framework for being able to do a review of a role description, either your own or a member of staff within your team, to allow you to make sure that the role descriptions continue to be fit for purpose or are changed to meet any kind of necessities that there are. Moving on to the other element of the competency audit toolkit, which is the organisational audit. And this is was one of the key kind of things I wanted to make sure that we developed when Amy and I have been working on these resources over the past year. And it's about being able to benchmark the competencies across your organisation in relation to your current and target capabilities from RAM. So basically what you're looking to do is you're inputting your RAM scores. It's going to tell you what skill levels you need for each of the skill elements to be able to support both your current capabilities and your target capabilities. And then it's going to give you a report as to whether you are meeting those targets at the moment or you have those skill levels in place. So before starting this audit, we really would recommend that you think carefully about this. This is probably, it's going to be much bigger than doing an individual audit. So think carefully about the aims and outcomes. What are you hoping to do with the information that you gather from doing an organisational audit? Are you doing this to help structure development for staff at your organisation, or perhaps making the case for additional staff members? And that's really going to help you develop your approach to how you do the organisational audit. Obviously, you need to think about the process of doing the audit itself. So have you got a RAM assessment in place already, or are you going to need to complete that process? And how are you going to capture the information on kind of each of the individual staff skills? So the process involves all of the staff who are within the scope of the audit completing the first 2 columns of the individual staff audit spreadsheet, and then inputting that all into the organisational spreadsheets. And this is where there might be a certain amount of kind of sensitivity in terms of how you approach this. You'll have some people who'll be happy to get to do this process, that they'll see the benefits that will come from it, that it's a positive thing. They might want to work through it individually. They might do it as part of a regular appraisal review. Some might want to do it in a kind of workshop setting where you get together and talk about things. But you will find there are some staff as well who'll be quite sensitive in this issue, and it's something really important to bear in mind, that some might see this as a criticism on the way that they kind of do their job and their ability to do so, that you are kind of casting negative aspersions on whether they have the skills needed to do digital preservation. So it is very important that you think about those issues when deciding how you're actually going to do your organisational audits, and take that into consideration and have some kind of sensitivity to the different kind of dynamics that you might have within your team. And scoping is really important as well. Like with RAM, this has been designed to be quite flexible in terms of what is included within scope. And we had a question earlier about how would you scope RAM? And that's something that you really can decide within your own organisation as to what is useful for you. You might do a skills audit or a RAM assessment for your entire organisation, or you might do it on a particular stream of work or around a particular collection. And for the skills audit, it might be a particular team, it might be for a particular department. It's really up to you as to how to scope this and what will be most useful for you as an organisation. So in terms of inputting data into the organisational audit spreadsheets, this is relatively straightforward. The first sheet that you'll find in the workbook is for inputting your RAM scores, and it is just as simple as putting in the numerical scores for each of the sections of RAM. You can put in your current and target levels. At a minimum, you really want to be putting in your current levels, and that data is then pulled in by the workbook to produce results later on. The second sheet is for inputting your individual staff skill results. So it has a bit at the top where you're allowed to put in the information about names and role titles, although that information is not required to make the workbook produce results. We had some people, a part of the pilot, who were worried about privacy and whether that was essential or not, but it isn't. It's only actually the numerical information that you put in below that is required to generate the report at the end of it. And it is just a case of then copy and pasting the kind of numerical scores for the individual audits from each of the different sheets into this. And then you get, from that, you get this monster results sheet, which I will not even tell you how many complicated nested if statements there are in the formulas that go behind this. But let me tell you, my brain nearly exploded several times when putting it together. But what it does really is it takes the scores that you've put in against RAM and the scores you've put in for your individual skills, and then it does some calculations behind the scene and pulls you out this final report. So it really is minimal kind of information input into this to get all of this information out. And what we have here over on the left-hand side, it will give you, according to your RAM results, what the skill level you need at your organisation to be able to support that level of capacity for both your current RAM maturity and for your target RAM maturity. So say that you have you've scored a basic level for policy development and you want to hit a managed level. It will then tell you for your basic level, you need somebody with a beginner level of skills. For your managed level, you might need somebody at an intermediate or advanced level of skill. So that's just the kind of basic information about the skill levels required to meet your competencies. The next kind of 2 bits are actually bringing through results from the individual spreadsheets and comparing them. So the middle section is looking at the highest level of skill any member of staff has amongst the scores that you've inputted into the spreadsheets. So it lists the highest level of skill and then tell you if there are any gaps between your current RAM level and your target RAM level in terms of skills. So you can see here, for the current RAM level, this organisation has very few gaps. They're actually skilled up well to support the capacity level they're at. But there are increasingly number of skill level gaps when you look at where they are for their target level in RAM. So these are areas where they might potentially look to prioritise development for their staff. And it will also tell you how many levels you're out. So it might be if you are currently at a beginner level, it will say you're 2 levels out, so you need somebody to be moving up to an advanced level. And then the last section looks at your average skill level. So you've had your highest skill level, but what's your average skill level for this skill element across the team? So it allows you those 2 different viewpoints onto the information. So you might find that you are actually meeting this highest skill level with a member of staff, but then when you dig into the data a little bit more, you might find, oh, actually that person isn't working directly on this in a kind of aspect of digital preservation. So have a look at the average skill level to see if there's gaps there and maybe needing to upskill across the people within your organisation. And you can see here that once you bring that average in, there's more gaps appearing in terms of the skill levels for the individuals within the organisation. So that was everything we wanted to cover on the DPC CAT resources. As we've said several times already, these are all available on the DPC website. You just need to go to the digital preservation section and you'll find links there to all of the competency framework, the competency audit toolkit and the RAM resources. But if you go there, you will find links to a whole bunch of other resources as well. And I'm going to do a quick run through what those are, or what some of them are, for the rest of this session. Hopefully you'll find some things there that will be useful to you. So starting off at the beginner level, we have our Novice to Know-How online training course, which was developed on behalf of the National Archives of the UK as part of their Plugged In, Powered Up digital capacity building project. And it focuses on providing practical focused training for people who are kind of new to digital preservation. So really kind of looking to delve into what are practical things we can put into place to take digital preservation forward, our organisation. And it includes things like tool demos as well. So looks at some freely available tools that can help you actually start to put a simple digital preservation workflow in place. We have been completely blown away by how popular this has been. In the first 2 years since it's been launched, it's been completed by nearly 3,000 learners in 62 countries, which is just like well beyond anything that we ever imagined. And it is free to access for anybody. We currently have quite a lot of capacity for sign-ups, so if you know anybody at your organisation who might be interested to do it, then I'd really encourage them to sign up soon, because we are looking at rolling out more online training in the near future, and that's going to start reducing the amount of kind of spaces that we have available for Novice to Know-How. So get in there now, freely available to anybody, not just DPC members. Second up, kind of again at the kind of beginner level, or kind of starting to move a little bit up, is the Digital Preservation Handbook. Again, that's something else that falls within Amy and I's scope in workforce development. It's a general introduction to all things digital preservation, and was developed collaboratively by a group of digital preservation experts through what we call book sprints, where we basically lock them away in a room for a couple of days and force them to write sections of the handbook. So it's all, again, good practice advice from people who are doing digital preservation. Includes lots of links to other trusted resources as well, and it also has video versions of all the tool demos from the Novice to Know-How course. We are looking to do an update of the DP handbook, so probably sometime next year we'll be looking to launch the 3rd edition, so keep an eye out for that. Getting into a little bit more kind of specialised area, you might want to have a look at our Technology Watch publications. So there's 2 different versions of our Tech Watch publications. First of all, we have our reports, which are in-depth reference guides to specific content or data types. I can't actually remember for me off the top of my head how many there are now, but quite a few. They are all peer-reviewed, so very trustworthy, and are about 40 pages in length. You can see the image here is for our most recent published one, Preserving Born Digital Design and Construction Records. So that's getting into more specific formats and things like that. We also have a lighter weight series called our Guidance Notes, which are bite-sized overviews of specific digital preservation challenges or solutions. And they're really about combining practical guidance like you would get in the Tech Watch report with more kind of accessibility. So they're generally between kind of 2 and 5 pages long. So an easy reads that will give you an introduction and some practical tips on the topics that they cover. And there's a really nice, particularly suite of guidance notes on common file formats that I recommend having a look at. We have a whole range of toolkits, guides, and more as well. So Roxana mentioned we've got a toolkit for helping you to develop policy at your organisation. We have a guide for helping you to advocate for digital preservation to executives at your organisation. Jen mentioned our business case toolkits, which a new version of will be getting released soon. We have a toolkit to help you if you're looking to procure a repository system, if you're looking to do preservation of EDRMS systems. Recently released, we have a beginner's guide to computational access for digital preservation. And also we have a lot of advocacy activities that we do on behalf of the wider community. So coming up at the beginning of November, there will be World Digital Preservation Day 2022. And that will also see the launch of a new version of our bit list, which is about digitally endangered species. If you have any questions about that, Amy's your girl. She's been working on that recently, looking at kind of key file formats and types of digital content that are at risk currently. And everything I've mentioned up to now is all freely available on the DPC website. These are not for members only, they are for anybody to access and use. We do have some other member benefits, though, that you can access if you do become a DPC member, and that includes things like participation in our working groups and task forces. Garth, who's here from the NRS, is the head of our web archiving working group. We have grants to support career development of our members, so Amy manages those. So we basically offer grants for people to do any training that they feel that they might need in digital preservation and related. We have kind of free or exclusive priority access to the DPC events. So we have events all the time, and members can come to those for free, either exclusively or they'll be given priority access for registration. We do a lot of peer support and knowledge exchange through the DPC community. And then if you are a member, you also get to help steer our activities. So we have a range of subcommittees who work in each of our different strategic areas to help guide the activities that we do and to help us prioritise what the digital preservation community needs. And finally, for people who join as full members of the DPC, we offer direct member support, and that can be things like coming to help you write a digital preservation policy, or doing a review of your digital preservation capabilities, or coming in to do in-house training for your team. So lots of additional member benefits that you can get. So that's pretty much everything we wanted to cover as well on Digital Preservation Coalition resources. Before I finish up, we've had an awful lot of rams and cats today. We do love our animals, but we couldn't let you go without also having some pictures of DPC doggos. So these are the family pets of me, Jen, and Amy. So particularly draw your face with my very derpy boy at the bottom. They are Pretzel. We might be doing a meet and greet with Pretzel and Crouton, who's in the middle tomorrow evening, if anybody wants to come and meet them in person. They've become quite Zoom famous through the lockdown. So that's everything from us today. I hope you found this useful, and everything we've mentioned is available on the DPC website. and you're welcome to contact us either by email or on Twitter. We'll pause now to see if there's any kind of final questions or things that you would like to ask us, bring up. Anybody? Oh, Remco.
Hiya. I was just wondering, we're not a member of DPC, but if we wanted to use RAM or CAT and do all this work in a workshop form, is there some kind of support or something that we can pay for? Commercial parties offering services in that area, or do we have to invent that wheel ourselves?
Well, we don't do a lot of we have done some external consultancy, but it's not something we do as standard. All of the resources come with really extensive guidance. So particularly the CAT, I thought I would write about 3 pages of guidance for the CAT, and it's turned out to be like 18. So apologies for anybody who has to read that. So there is a lot of help there for you if you are going to be doing these processes yourself anyway. Any more support, our first instance would say, please consider DPC membership, because that support comes as part of that. And to be honest, the amount of money you would pay us potentially for consultancy would probably be more than you might pay for a DPC membership. But yeah, please contact us and we'll open the dialogue to see what we can do. Oh, Garth. Wait a minute, we'll get a microphone over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, you might have covered it earlier. Apologies if you did. But I remember whenever the RAM came out, you sort of gave an estimated time for how long it would take to do one. Mm-hmm. Do you kind of have a sense for doing a CAT, how long it could take on average?
Yeah, well, we found that because it depends which of the audits you're doing. So it's a kind of, particularly for the organisational audit, it depends on what scope you do. So I think that you could probably work through the individual audit, at least the basic parts of it, within about an hour. I think that was probably doable. But for the organisational one, that will depend on how you scope it in terms of who you're including within the organisational audit and how kind of sensitive or difficult the people that you work with are, to be completely frank. So if it's a small team, it's maybe something you could all do together in an afternoon. If it's a big team, then it might require some kind of like actual formal project structure and a few weeks at least to put that into place. Everybody, we got.
Thanks. Liz Kata again, IAEA. This is my first time seeing this, working with this, and I have to say I really like it. But a couple of thoughts I had were, one, yeah, I don't know, maybe for the politics of the organizational audit, whether it would be useful to already sort of designate target skill levels based on job description, right? Because I mean, I was looking at some of these things and was saying to myself, I have sufficient skills for what my job description is, but I definitely, I'm not a manager, I'm not managing staff, I can't and probably shouldn't be doing these things, right? And on the other hand, I thought this could be very interesting. I mean, you mentioned this too, but say for both performance development, but also maybe like some sort of like 360 audit, right? Like I think I'm doing this, and I think I'm at this level, and whether my manager would agree with that, right? But also to get that sort of level of like, what are the expectations of what my superiors think I should be doing versus, well, actually based on my job description and skill level, this is what I can bring, you know? Yeah. So anyways, very interesting exercise. So,
yeah, so to pick up on those things, so in terms of like the individual audit, I think interesting what you say there about comparing your kind of ideas versus like maybe your managers, and I think that's a way that it can be rolled into like an appraisal cycle, and maybe you might think to check out those, you might both fill out the audit separately and then compare them. So that's a possibility, and actually I've realised that in what you've said there is one other resource that goes along with the competency framework and CAT that we haven't mentioned, which is a big oversight. So one of the things we've also developed is a set of 8 example role descriptions for people at various levels of their digital preservation careers. And again, that's available, they're all available through the same pages on the DPC website. So it's starting off with people who are perhaps a graduate in digital preservation course, people in a traineeship, through people who are working at kind of an officer level, through a librarian, archivist. We have ones specifically for a digital preservation focused developer, for someone who is a web archivist, and then through to like a program manager and or an executive. And each of those, they're not meant to be prescriptive by any way, but they at least aim to set out kind of examples of what kind of skill levels you might be looking at having for that kind of stage in your career. So again, if you are looking to do that kind of individual kind of benchmarking and have an idea of what skill levels you might be trying to target, then have a look at the example role descriptions, and they might be able to help you out. And our plan is, as Jen said, RAM has already been through one review and will be reviewed as required. And we plan to do the same thing with CATS, that as we kind of get feedback in and feel the need to do so, we will be doing updates on a regular basis. But hopefully, again, we'll be able to keep the fundamental kind of competency areas and skill elements stable over time. That might be just the guidance that goes along with them kind of grows and evolves. And we are planning to develop additional resources to go along. So the next one on our to-do list is resources to help with digital preservation recruitment. After that, we're going to have a look at something around kind of levelling up with CAT, so similar to what Jen's been working on for RAM. Like you're at a beginner level in policy development, what kind of training or development opportunities might there be that can help you level up to a kind of intermediate or advanced level in skills. So those are things that are coming down the line, and of course there'll be more training as well. Amy and I have a to-do list, or a wish list perhaps is more like it, of training courses that we want to develop in digital preservation. Some of them around the softer skills, so risk management is one of the things there, and others looking at more kind of specific digital preservation issues. So we've got email preservation is one of the ones that are on the list too. Any more questions before we finish up? Oh, yep, over here.
Very not a question, but very, very super excited about digital preservation recruitment help. Is going to be fantastic. Just, it's a tricky landscape, and we've actually struggled a little bit to recruit into some digital preservation roles, just around skill sets and expectations and things like that. So just super excited and can't wait. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's it. We're hopefully, when we get into those, we'll be looking to kind of draw on particularly the Digital Preservation Coalition membership and their experiences of recruitment. We have a lot of kind of anecdotal stuff we've heard from members over the year, but probably gather information in a more structured way. And it is something we help members out with a lot, is kind of recruitment processes. So we'll give feedback on job adverts, and we'll sit on recruitment boards for our members. And it is something that I've had to give feedback to people in the past saying, your job description for this role is completely unachievable. You will not be able to hire somebody with all of these skills, particularly for that amount of money. So, so one of the things that might come with the recruitment is a bit of a cold bucket of water for people, saying, be more realistic about your recruitment for digital preservation. But it always takes me back to a panel session I was involved in at the Archives and Records Association conference about 5 years ago now, where we were talking about digital preservation skills for the archive sector. And there were several quite senior people from archival organisations in the UK and Ireland there. And they were all saying that actually when they recruit, the thing that they want most is people who are willing to develop and change and be able to cope with like the continuing pace of digital preservation, not necessarily digital preservation skills particularly. So people who will learn the context of their own the organisation that they're coming into, and learn the digital preservation knowledge needed for that context, rather than, you know, being able to recite whole sections of OAIS, which I really hope nobody can actually do. Yeah, that was also, I have to say, one of the crowning moments of my career was that panel, because I said that I felt that digital preservation skills were far more important to people working in archives than things like paleography. And the next year, there was a whole panel at the conference to tell me why I was wrong. but they made the mistake of inviting Jane to be on that panel, who completely agrees with me. So. Yeah, so yeah, we are aware that we've got loads of people online, so if anybody online would like to ask us a question before we finish up today, then please do drop the questions into Slido. We've not had any there from you guys. We'd really like to hear from you. Anything else in the room while we wait to see if anything comes through there? Everybody just overloaded with information now and really want to go and have lunch. Well, we're finishing up about 20 minutes early, so if you want to stay here and maybe work on your RAM or your skills audit a little bit more, then we're happy to answer any questions that you have. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you found it useful, and please do make use of all of the resources on the DPC website.